development, education and human development, decent work for all, development cooperation, and partnerships. These are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals and the regional attainment of the 2030 Agenda. These priorities are also areas where the OAS SETI has extensive experience and proven impact. We have come a long way. But still have much work to do. "70 years ago, an inter-American dream and promise was enshrined in the OAS Charter. We can deliver on this promise. Our future leaders are counting on us."
Me and my kids have been there for over an year right now. And children are friends. It doesn't matter where they come from.
Estamos en una zona netamente selvática. La línea de adyacencia va desde el norte hasta el sur, va desde Modesto Méndez hasta Aguas Turbias, tanto en el norte como en el sur. Esta línea tiene 215 kilómetros de extensión.
De allí vino él, se buscó creo con los de la OEA y de allí vino el proyecto para acá, para Judá. Y fue que lo dieron el terreno y lo dieron todo que era mano de obra y el material para hacer las casas que están ahorita. Y por ese motivo estamos aquí viviendo todavía.
La misión continúa trabajando en la implementación de medidas de fomento de la confianza mientras aguarda el resultado del reclamo que está atendiendo la Corte Internacional de Justicia por la disputa marítima, territorial e insular. Nuestra oficina en la zona de adyacencia realiza verificaciones a solicitud de ambos gobiernos, facilita reuniones y patrullajes conjuntos entre las Fuerzas Armadas y promueve una cultura de paz y cooperación entre las comunidades locales.
Children will be children. And they have harmony. They don't see each other as a different country, but they see each other that they're growing together.
Con la ayuda financiera de la Unión Europea.
Hoy, esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
Development cooperation has always been a priority for the OAS. The OAS SETI works with all member states to identify common challenges and define solutions through policy dialogue, which is transformed into action through technical cooperation initiatives. Policy dialogue is central to our work in development. The OAS SETI convenes development leaders in 11 ministerial meetings and high-level processes on priority areas such as competitiveness, labor, education, among others. Technical cooperation initiatives emerge from ongoing dialogue and are therefore established with built-in political support. All of our actions place people at the center, generating a multiplier effect in the region. We enhance human capacity by working with key stakeholders. This strengthens institutions, improving policies and programs, benefiting millions of people in the Americas. Our ability to deliver results relies on broad collaboration. Partnerships for Development, Cooperación Solidaria, is a unique OAS concept which recognizes that each member state, regardless of its size, wealth, or level of development, has value to share and can learn from others. This concept also includes close collaboration with other partners, amplifying our reach and impact. As we mark 70 years of work on development, we take a look back. This long evolution, driven by member states, has fine-tuned our unique model to support inter-American development. Today, all of our efforts fall into 5 strategic priorities: inclusive and competitive economies, sustainable development, education and human development, decent work for all, development cooperation, and partnerships. These are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals and the regional attainment of the 2030 Agenda. These priorities are also areas where the OAS SETI has extensive experience and proven impact. We have come a long way. But still have much work to do. "70 years ago, an inter-American dream and promise was enshrined in the OAS Charter. We can deliver on this promise. Our future leaders are counting on us."
Me and my kids have been there for over an year right now. And children are friends. It doesn't matter where they come from.
Nosotros estamos en una zona netamente selvática. La línea de adyacencia va desde el norte hasta el sur, va desde Modesto Méndez hasta Aguas Turbias, tanto en el norte como en el sur. Esta línea tiene 215 kilómetros de extensión.
De allí vino él, se buscó creo con los de la OEA y de allí vino el proyecto para acá, para Judá. Y fue que lo dieron el terreno y lo dieron todo lo que era mano de obra y el material para hacer las casas que están ahorita. Y por ese motivo estamos aquí viviendo todavía.
La misión continúa trabajando en la implementación de medidas de fomento de la confianza mientras se aguarda el resultado del reclamo que está atendiendo la Corte Internacional de Justicia por la disputa marítima, territorial e insular. Nuestra oficina en la zona de adyacencia realiza verificaciones a solicitud de ambos gobiernos, facilita reuniones y patrullajes conjuntos entre las Fuerzas Armadas y promueve una cultura de paz y cooperación entre las comunidades locales.
Children will be children. And they have harmony. They don't see each other as a different country, but they see each other that they're growing together.
Hoy, esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
More than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
Development cooperation has always been a priority for the OAS. The OAS SETI works with all member states to identify common challenges and define solutions through policy dialogue, which is transformed into action through technical cooperation initiatives. Policy dialogue is central to our work in development. The OAS SETI convenes development leaders in 11 ministerial meetings and high-level processes on priority areas such as competitiveness, labor, education, among others. Technical cooperation initiatives emerge from ongoing dialogue and are therefore established with built-in political support. All of our actions place people at the center, generating a multiplier effect in the region. We enhance human capacity by working with key stakeholders. This strengthens institutions, improving policies and programs, benefiting millions of people in the Americas. Our ability to deliver results relies on broad collaboration. Partnerships for Development, Cooperación Solidaria, is a unique OAS concept which recognizes that each member state, regardless of its size, wealth, or level of development, has value to share and can learn from others. This concept also includes close collaboration with other partners, amplifying our reach and impact. As we mark 70 years of work on development, we take a look back. This long evolution, driven by member states, has fine-tuned our unique model to support inter-American development. Today, all of our efforts fall into 5 strategic priorities: inclusive and competitive economies, sustainable development, education and human development, decent work for all, development cooperation and partnerships. These are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals and the regional attainment of the 2030 Agenda. These priorities are also areas where the OAS SETI has extensive experience and proven impact. We have come a long way. But still have much work to do. "70 years ago, an inter-American dream and promise was enshrined in the OAS Charter. We can deliver on this promise. Our future leaders are counting on us."
Me and my kids have been there for over an year right now. And children are friends. It doesn't matter where they come from.
Nosotros estamos en una zona netamente selvática. La línea de adyacencia va desde el norte hasta el sur, va desde Modesto Méndez hasta Aguas Turbias, tanto en el norte como en el sur. Esta línea tiene 215 kilómetros de extensión.
De allí vino él, se buscó creo con los de la OEA y de allí vino el proyecto para acá, para Judá. Y fue que lo dieron el terreno y lo dieron todo que era mano de obra y el material para hacer las casas que están ahorita. Y por ese motivo estamos aquí viviendo todavía.
La misión continúa trabajando en la implementación de medidas de fomento de la confianza mientras se aguarda el resultado del reclamo que está atendiendo la Corte Internacional de Justicia por la disputa marítima, territorial e insular. Nuestra oficina en la zona de adyacencia realiza verificaciones a solicitud de ambos gobiernos, facilita reuniones y patrullajes conjuntos entre las Fuerzas Armadas y promueve una cultura de paz y cooperación entre las comunidades locales.
Children will be children. And they have harmony. They don't see each other as a different country, but they see each other that they're growing together.
Señor José Olivera, buenas tardes. Si puede encender su cámara y su micrófono, por favor.
Hoy, esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
More than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
Development cooperation has always been a priority for the OAS. The OAS SETI works with all member states to identify common challenges and define solutions through policy dialogue, which is transformed into action through technical cooperation initiatives. Policy dialogue is central to our work in development. The OAS SETI convenes development leaders in 11 ministerial meetings and high-level processes on priority areas such as competitiveness, labor, education, among others. Technical cooperation initiatives emerge from ongoing dialogue and are therefore established with built-in political support. All of our actions place people at the center, generating a multiplier effect in the region. We enhance human capacity by working with key stakeholders. This strengthens institutions, improving policies and programs, benefiting millions of people in the Americas. Our ability to deliver results relies on broad collaboration. Partnerships for Development, Cooperación Solidaria, is a unique OAS concept which recognizes that each member state, regardless of its size, wealth, or level of development, has value to share and can learn from others. This concept also includes close collaboration with other partners, amplifying our reach and impact. As we mark 70 years of work on development, we take a look back. This long evolution, driven by member states, has fine-tuned our unique model to support inter-American development. Today, all of our efforts fall into 5 strategic priorities: inclusive and competitive economies, sustainable development, education and human development, decent work for all, development cooperation, and partnerships. These are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals and the regional attainment of the 2030 Agenda. These priorities are also areas where the OAS SETI has extensive experience and proven impact. We have come a long way. But still have much work to do. "70 years ago, an inter-American dream and promise was enshrined in the OAS Charter. We can deliver on this promise. Our future leaders are counting on us."
Me and my kids have been there for over an year right now. And children are friends. It doesn't matter where they come from.
Nosotros estamos en una zona netamente selvática. La línea de adyacencia va desde el norte hasta el sur, va desde Modesto Méndez hasta Aguas Turbias, tanto en el norte como en el sur. Esta línea tiene 215 kilómetros de extensión.
De allí vino él, se buscó creo con los de la OEA y de allí vino el proyecto para acá, para Judá. Y fue que lo dieron el terreno y lo dieron todo que era mano de obra y el material para hacer las casas que están ahorita. Y por ese motivo estamos aquí viviendo todavía.
La misión continúa trabajando en la implementación de medidas de fomento de la confianza mientras se aguarda el resultado del reclamo que está atendiendo la Corte Internacional de Justicia por la disputa marítima, territorial e insular. Nuestra oficina en la zona de adyacencia realiza verificaciones a solicitud de ambos gobiernos, facilita reuniones y patrullajes conjuntos entre las Fuerzas Armadas y promueve una cultura de paz y cooperación entre las comunidades locales.
Children will be children. And they have harmony. They don't see each other as a different country, but they see each other that they're growing together.
Perfecto, gracias. Buenas tardes, por favor, haz las señas de decir buenas tardes.
Hoy, esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
Development cooperation has always been a priority for the OAS. The OAS SETI works with all member states to identify common challenges and define solutions through policy dialogue, which is transformed into action through technical cooperation initiatives. Policy dialogue is central to our work in development. The OAS SETI convenes development leaders in 11 ministerial meetings and high-level processes on priority areas such as competitiveness, labor, education, among others. Technical cooperation initiatives emerge from ongoing dialogue and are therefore established with built-in political support. All of our actions place people at the center, generating a multiplier effect in the region. We enhance human capacity by working with key stakeholders. This strengthens institutions, improving policies and programs, benefiting millions of people in the Americas. Our ability to deliver results relies on broad collaboration. Partnerships for Development, Cooperación Solidaria, is a unique OAS concept which recognizes that each member state, regardless of its size, wealth, or level of development, has value to share and can learn from others. This concept also includes close collaboration with other partners, amplifying our reach and impact. As we mark 70 years of work on development, we take a look back. This long evolution, driven by member states, has fine-tuned our unique model to support inter-American development. Today, all of our efforts fall into 5 strategic priorities: inclusive and competitive economies, sustainable development, education and human development, decent work for all, development cooperation and partnerships. These are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals and the regional attainment of the 2030 Agenda. These priorities are also areas where the OAS SETI has extensive experience and proven impact. We have come a long way. But still have much work to do. "70 years ago, an inter-American dream and promise was enshrined in the OAS Charter. We can deliver on this promise. Our future leaders are counting on us."
Me and my kids have been there for over an year right now. And children are friends. It doesn't matter where they come from.
Nosotros estamos en una zona netamente selvática. La línea de adyacencia va desde el norte hasta el sur, va desde Modesto Méndez hasta Aguas Turbias, tanto en el norte como en el sur. Esta línea tiene 215 kilómetros de extensión.
De allí vino él, se buscó creo con los de la OEA y de allí vino el proyecto para acá, para Judá. Y fue que lo dieron el terreno y lo dieron todo que era mano de obra y el material para hacer las casas que están ahorita. Y por ese motivo estamos aquí viviendo todavía.
La misión continúa trabajando en la implementación de medidas de fomento de la confianza mientras aguarda el resultado del reclamo que está atendiendo la Corte Internacional de Justicia por la disputa marítima, territorial e insular. Nuestra oficina en la zona de adyacencia realiza verificaciones a solicitud de ambos gobiernos, facilita reuniones y patrullajes conjuntos entre las Fuerzas Armadas y promueve una cultura de paz y cooperación entre las comunidades locales.
Children will be children. And they have harmony. They don't see each other as a different country, but they see each other that they're growing together.
Este video fue producido con la ayuda financiera de la Unión Europea.
Hoy, esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
more than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations as we look to the future.
Permanent and alternate representatives of the OAS member states, Mr. Secretary General Luis Almagro, Mr. Assistant Secretary General Ambassador Nestor Mendez, dear representatives of civil society and social actors. In my capacity as Deputy Chair of the Permanent Council, I am pleased to welcome you to this dialogue of heads of delegations, the Secretary General, the Assistant Secretary General, with representatives of civil society, workers, the private sector, and other social actors. All seek to promote and facilitate the participation and contribution of civil society and social actors to this 50th regular session of the OAS General Assembly. The constructive and positive contributions of civil society and social actors are of the utmost importance to nurture and enrich the discussion and deliberations of the member states and strengthen the activities of the organization. In this dialogue, the spokespersons of valuable social actors from workers' unions, the private sector, youth, as well as the official coalition of civil society and social actors, will have the opportunity to present before the member states the inputs of the work they have developed around the central theme of the General Assembly. Facing the challenges of COVID-19 in the hemisphere, a collaborative approach to address vulnerabilities and build resilience in times of crisis based on the 4 pillars of the OAS. This dialogue will last 4 hours, taking into account time constraints and the number of coalitions of civil society organizations, 31 in all, and other social actors, 5, who will present their inputs. The intervention of each spokesperson will be limited to a maximum of 3 minutes. I invite each and every spokesperson to respect the speaking time. As a word of caution, once the 3-minute mark is reached, your microphone will be turned off. Likewise, representatives of the member states will have the opportunity to respond to the presentations of civil society and social actors on 3 separate occasions. To this end, following each of the 3 rounds of interventions by the spokespersons of civil society and social actors, I will offer the floor to the representatives of the member states to refer to the recommendations of social actors and civil society coalitions. I encourage you to be brief in your interventions. The first round will include intervention from 14 spokespersons. The second round will include interventions by 12 spokespersons. And the third round will consist of 9 interventions. The dialogue will conclude at 1800 hours. There will be interpretation in all official languages of the OAS, as well as international sign language. I would now like to give the floor to the Honorable Secretary General of the OAS, who I understand is just coming, pressed for time from another meeting. The Honorable Luis Almagro for welcome and remarks. SG, you have the floor.
Gracias. Thank you very much, my friend and Chair Sydney Stanley Coley. I'm jumping from meeting to meeting, but this is a very unusual time. Friends, during this time and the pandemic, civil society, workers, the private sector, and youth have a very relevant role to play. This dialogue is an opportunity to work further with social actors in the hemisphere. This year has been a tremendous challenge for our hemisphere, which has been hard hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. Most people affected by the region have been affected by the pandemic. Economies have been affected as well. And we see the crisis and its effect on our societies. These are negative elements. We have seen the impact on the poor and the vulnerable. We have seen the effects also on vulnerable groups, including cases of domestic violence. We see other social and institutional trends that have taken root. We see the role of the family, which is a fundamental unit in this crisis. It plays a fundamental role in providing material and psychological support and solidarity to individuals who are suffering from this crisis. And to all of us who are working and who are dealing with the problems that arise from this crisis. At this time, we are obligated to think about how we can adjust and rethink our ways of living and governing and build our resilience to face these types of crises. We must strengthen our democratic systems of governance and have governability so that we can enjoy fully our human rights and make sure that we achieve multidimensional security and strengthen our economies for integral development. This dialogue is an exercise that will help us better address these challenges while at the same time dealing with the constraints of lockdowns. We must work to make sure that we can still provide services to the most vulnerable in societies and build resilience at the same time. We especially value the role of civil society in the General Assembly. This is an ideal forum to have a deeper interaction with representatives of CSOs, the private sector, people of African descent, indigenous peoples, and ministries. This has the impact of empowering civil society and making sure that it can do its work better, to better defend human rights, and to also promote democratic systems so that we can provide services to the most vulnerable. The OAS has made an effort to maintain the number of CSOs participating in these activities. This meeting, this General Assembly, has a participation of several hundred CSOs, organizations representing the private sector, indigenous groups, and communities of people of African descent, among others. The topics addressed by these CSOs vary, but the most important point is that all advocate for greater participation in democracy through CSOs. Otherwise, it is not possible to address the challenges of our societies. This effort is necessary more than ever, especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. COVID-19 has led to disease, death, economic hardship, and many other variables that affect the way our political systems operate. Civil society and the democratic system have also been affected, and civil society asks the democratic system to continue to be accountable. We must continue to provide support to our workers, and we are very grateful for their participation here.
Thank you. Thank you, Secretary General, for those remarks. We are going to begin this dialogue with the presentations of representatives of youth, workers, and the private sector. We will start with our youth representative, represented by Victor Ortiz Valles of the Youth Forum of the Americas. Mr. Ortiz, you have the floor.
Good afternoon to each and every delegation of the OAS and the authorities of the OAS and all of the invited guests. My name is Victor Ortiz Velez. I'm 22 years old. I'm from Puerto Rico, and I'm very honored to represent the diversity of voices of all young people from the Americas and who come from the Youth Forum of the Americas, particularly as they participate as youth in Summit of the Americas. In 2020, this has been a very difficult year for our continent. The pandemic of COVID-19 has hard hit our countries and has led us to the so-called representative dialogue, which is the spirit of cooperation and collective action. And as young people today, we work hand in hand, taking advantage of each and every one of the opportunities of the various organizations that we work with. Today, on behalf of all of the youth of the America, I'm going to talk to you about three crucial issues. The first is the consultative process that has taken place since November 2019 to June 2020 through the platform of permanent participation of the Youth Forum of the Americas. Here we've had 2,500 young people from 22 countries of the Americas and the Caribbean who have participated and spearheaded a total of 41 dialogues between young people, and we have had virtual consultations as well with the support of YABT. The consultations broached very openly many of the problems, the pressing problems of the crisis of the pandemic in each country. And we have also emphasized very important factors that we've shared so that we can report through a dialogue on an ongoing basis throughout the hemisphere. The first reality, young people that we are, is that we are vulnerable groups because of the pandemic, just like racial minorities, the LGBT community, women, and workers. And I want you to see that we are an ally. We are an ally to understand the situation better, to make you understand the situation better, and to take decisions as best we can for all of our countries. The second reality is that the problems that we're confronting are not only caused by the pandemic, but also are because of the increasing need that we have to work in a more coordinated way and in a more well-aligned way on national and local plans where all of us can feel represented as part of the solution. It's very important to underscore the importance and the impact of the Youth Forum in the Americas that has been created since 2005. We young people will continue to take advantage of this opportunity as the process continues in the Americas with a view to having that turn into the 9th Summit of the Americas that will be held in the United States. Now, I would like to thank you. The speaker has lost his broadcast, points out the interpreter.
Mr. Ortiz, unfortunately, your time ran out, and so your mic was muted. But thank you once again for those remarks. We will now hear from Ms. Marta Pujadas from CUSATE, who will speak on behalf of the workers of the Americas. Mrs. Pujadas, you have the floor.
Saludo a esta Asamblea General. La situación económica, política y social de nuestra región antes de la pandemia ya era muy compleja y de profunda vulnerabilidad, con informalidad y desempleo en aumento, pobreza, desigualdad y la fragilidad de los sistemas de protección social. El COVID-19 profundizó esta situación. La pandemia visibilizó esos problemas que ya el movimiento sindical de las Américas venía puntualizando desde hace mucho tiempo. Sistemáticas violaciones a la libertad sindical, violencia, persecuciones, debilitamiento de la negociación colectiva y ausencia del diálogo social. Hoy tampoco está garantizado en nuestra región el derecho al acceso al agua potable, un servicio y un derecho fundamental humano básico. La garantía del derecho a la salud hoy es más imperioso que nunca. Nos preocupa que en algunos países de nuestra región, en el marco del COVID-19, se aprueben leyes que tienden a la precarización y desprotección laboral, a la vulneración de la negociación colectiva y en muchos casos con ataques a la democracia. La salida a la crisis sanitaria, todas las salidas a la crisis sanitaria, económica y social, no pueden ser a costa de perder derechos laborales. Reconocemos las dificultades de las empresas y que los estados las auxilien para que se mantengan los empleos. Sin embargo, no podemos callarnos frente a aquellas empresas que promueven despidos masivos y realizan ajustes salariales o en estos casos nos obligan a trabajadores y trabajadoras a trabajar sin protección.
We fundamentally believe that the road to recovery must allow us to stimulate real production so that the economy can produce good services and jobs.
Plataforma, contribución a la elaboración y la construcción de un desarrollo sostenible. La pospandemia nos presenta.
We have the opportunity, an historical opportunity, to strengthen social dialogue, the role and the responsibility of each and every one of the social actors to set public policies. Workers will call on governments of the region to recognize the crucial role that workers' organizations play, and in the reply, as we look towards all of the agreements that we have here in the framework of the OAS and all of the work that we have before us for integral development, for a new and a better society, we had to have a new social contract that ends inequalities. This can only happen and be fulfilled with a institutionalized social dialogue, one that is efficient, both in each and every one of the countries throughout the hemisphere, so that we can have more fair societies. We need an America where production employment is at the crux of economic development with respect for the environment, for security and everything. And we have to have governments that put all of this in place for the national scenario. We have to have freedoms in our region. We have to have a region of peace and peoples that represent peace. Thank you very much.
Chairman, your mic is muted.
Thank you, ASG. I want to thank Ms. Pujadas for those remarks. I now invite Mr. Daniel Funes from the Business Technology Advisory Committee on Labor Matters to speak on behalf of our continent's private sector. Mr. Funes, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. En nombre de CIATAL y de la Organización Internacional de Empleadores, quiero señalar la importancia de este momento. Ha quedado en claro cuál es la realidad, lo señaló el secretario general, lo señala la CEPAL, cuáles son los datos de la crisis del COVID. A partir de ahí, nosotros pensamos que el rol de la OEA es fundamental en los pasos a seguir hacia adelante. Hacen falta políticas.
The role is crucial. There are macroeconomic policies that have to be looked at, not just for survival, but also for employment and businesses, but also to generate all of the changes at appropriate time in an adequate way for business, for productivity, and for a new basis for growth that is sustainable. The governments have to speed up transformations and changes so that once and for all we can fulfill gaps and digitalization, innovation, and we can move ahead with science and technology in Latin America and the Caribbean. They cannot compete unless we have these aspects done professionally and in all full-fledged productivity, which will confirm our role. In a context of like this, we also have to stand for multilateralism and defend it, and this is what we spearhead. It's crucial for us that the OAS be the opportunity, the forum amongst states throughout the region and with all of the social factors in attendance so that we can have sustainable development for the Americas, which will allow us to meet the needs for adaptation, for a productive world and social inclusion with work that is registered and socially productive. Given all of this, there is a need for each and every country, but also, obviously, for societies across the board. It is imperative to strengthen things throughout the region and to build the programmatic and operative systems that make it possible to bring together immersion, productivity, competitiveness, employment, and social protection or safety nets. In other words, economic development with social inclusion. And that is how we can do things together. I would like to underscore the role of private sector as part of the economy to strengthen all of our systems with technical training through models such as social ongoing dialogue. But in addition to this, we also have to make considerations for having participation of the Inter-American Development Bank and sub-regional banks as well, so that they can offer alternatives and social support, connectivity. And without these features, without these elements, if we do not bring all of this together, social development, politics, we will never be able to reach our port. The OAS plays a crucial role in all of this. Thank you very much.
Chairman, you're mute. Excuse me, sir. Mr. Chairman, your mic is muted.
Thank you very much, Mr. Funes, for those remarks. I thank once again the representative of the Youth of the Americas, as well as the president of COSATE and CITAL, who have brought the voice of the workers and employers of the Americas to the dialogue. We will continue with the representative of civil society organized into coalitions. And to begin, I now call to the floor Mr. Juan Carlos Viloria of the Coalition for Venezuela. Mr. Viloria, you may proceed.
Microphone, please. It's important to talk about things that have happened since my first set of comments. At this General Assembly, there is a coalition that I'm very honored to head up of all of the countries in our coalition. Today, we are a federation that is made up of 32 organizations. On behalf of all of the members in the various and sundry organizations, we would like to warmly welcome and greet this General Assembly, chairs of the General Assembly, Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, heads of delegation, all and everyone, friends. We are looking at the Venezuelan situation, and we've had a lot of challenges to improve the situation for our peoples, a victim of a humanitarian catastrophe, the largest in all mankind. We have a regime that suppresses and oppresses fundamental rights of all Venezuelans. Nicolas Maduro and his cohort have oppressed us. And the help of the OAS and the support of the OAS will stand by us in addition to the agreements that we have against terrorism. For the moment, as I speak these words, more than 500,000 people have left Venezuela, finding gaps here. And we spoke about this at the last General Assembly, and we asked once again that we have support from member states, and we are refugees. We are human beings. We are people with rights. And this is established in the Latin American and Caribbean, and this brings together 3,500 professionals. We've had more than 9,000 Venezuelans, thanks to a network of volunteers that offer humanitarian assistance and has given us an opportunity. This has allowed us to identify social needs, have professional and vocational training opportunities to develop for many countries. We make concerted efforts without that of governments, Colombia, Chile, and others. They have warmly received a lot of our refugees, United States and Canada as well. The main ones that have come up with replies to this crisis, and member states have to have a document to identify and will allow Venezuelans to integrate back into the community in which they live. And we have to double up our efforts to end the dictatorship that reigns in Venezuela now. A safeguard. Let's make the change. Thank you very much before it's too late. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Next, we welcome Ms. Monica Del Pilar Gomez to take the floor. In her capacity as spokesperson for the Coalition of Human Mobility in the Americas. Ms. Gomez, you have the floor.
Good afternoon. Throughout the region, we've seen human rights and a situation of refugees, and COVID has deepened the inequalities, the economic and social inequalities, and a lot of the gaps, and made the population more vulnerable. For this situation, we're very concerned with the particular situation that we have for refugees and people that live with greater risk, with different situations given gender and age. There are disabled people, people who live in poverty and so on. We have many areas that we can feel our priority. We look at these obstacles and we look at some of the refugees, looking at some of the possibilities of looking for their rights and to receive asylum. We have to look at the borders. We have to have international protection, particularly for the most vulnerable, where their life or their human rights are at risk. We have seen a phenomenon as these things take place in the different countries, and we have the stigmatization, which is very specific, including gender. The border situation has increased drug trafficking and other vicissitudes. There are some obligations that we see and protection from the international arena, even during the pandemic. So we would like to make a special appeal to states to carry forth collective action, as well as to set up a migratory regulatory or regulated system. We'd like to have economic, social, and cultural rights guaranteed for migrants. And this includes access to more opportunities for migrants, which in many cases work in informal economies and also run many risks. We're very concerned with the health of every people, and also not just because of COVID-19, but also other issues that have to do with health in the productive chain. We would like to have international oversight of human rights. Migrants have looked at different kinds of situations, health situations, and different protocols which transmit the virus. So we'd like to make an appeal to the international arena and all states to quickly rush to helping and offer access to these people. Then another appeal to have a response in the face of COVID-19 for the refugee migrant situations. There are different levels and different kinds of discrimination that we have against women, the LGBT society, people that have HIV, AIDS, and people who are disabled, as well as others. Thank you very much.
Ms. Gomez for her intervention. And now I'd like to give the floor to a representative of the Coalition for Opportunities for Social Order. Will that representative please take the floor? We'll move on. We'd like to call on, go right ahead, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I represent a coalition. I'm going to talk about the family as an institution, and considering that the pandemic has hard hit people, and we have to look at how we can strengthen our systems, our economies, our financial systems, and our system of freedoms, our political situations and international arenas. And also we have to look at the stability of civil society. Family is one of the pillars that has worked as a solid pillar to deal with the COVID-19 very effectively without any other. It's been one of the pillars, and it has offered emotional affection, strength without anything else. And many people have been left without work. Many people have been impoverished under the threshold of poverty. Other institutions have not provided more basic needs, and that is why the family has covered totally unprotected people. And we have to look at this on a personal and a collective way. We survive as people and as a society in the face of the pandemic, and we not get out of this crisis in which we have the family at the center without valuing the family and the tools that all families have so that families can continue to work and do what they do best. And that is why our blueprints for the pandemic should revolve around the family. We have member states that we'd like to propose looking at the family as a basic institution, which is the core of societies, with economic and political rights with which we can confront the crisis. We also have to look at the state institutions of the state as well as the family. We need stable, strong families, and that is why in each and every country we have to have state institutions that facilitate things, give people the right to asylum, and look at the rights for minors, for senior citizens, and particularly looking at the family as part of the culture of the society as well as one of the main institutions. This is with full-fledged participation in this assembly, and also in terms of the undeniable work that the community does as well. All of these topics have to be looked at, the family and our way ahead. Thank you very much. In the OAS without the exclusion.
We thank the representative for those remarks. And now I'd like to give the floor to Ms. Giovanna Diaz-Contreras, who represents the Coalition on Indigenous Coordination, Abya Yala. Ms. Diaz, please take the floor.
Microphone, please.
Unmute. Ms. Diaz, your microphone is muted. Can you unmute?
Perdón, representante, no le escuchamos.
Dear representatives of civil society and all, at this 50th General Assembly of the Organization of American States, we would like to speak on behalf of indigenous peoples and our coalition. We would like to speak to how we've confronted with some of the challenge in the last 90 years. More than 70% of diseases have hit us hard. This has had an impact on our populations, but we have tried to be sustainable, looking at the natural features. This pandemic has clearly underscored some of the deficiencies in public health, the lack of equipment, medicine, and prevention or preventative measures. We have to try to strengthen our national systems and look at all of the systems that we have so that we can receive information for our communities. Culturally, this is crucial. We have had a lot of gaps in setbacks or insufficiencies or deficiencies, I should say. And this is in the area of health. We have protocols for some of the traditional systems. With the advent of the coronavirus, we hope that we will be able to overcome this and take on some of the challenges. We have to prioritize and strengthen all that we can do, the political decisions that are made, so that we can cut back all of the deficiencies and we can strengthen areas of health and health systems, as well as training, so that we can promote biodiversity and cultural understanding. We have to recognize all that has to be done so that we can have the full-fledged use and enjoyment of human rights collectively. We have to implement a plan of action on the American Declaration on the rights for indigenous peoples. From 2017 to 2021.
We thank Ms. Contreras for those remarks from the Coalition of Indigenous People. And now I'd like to give the floor to Ms. Erlendi Ciro, the Coalition of Persons of African Descent. Ms. Ciro, you have the floor.
I represent human rights for women in the Americas. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The impact of COVID-19 generated a situation, a health situation, which has affected the most impoverished populations. And this has taken place across the board in all social spheres. In migration, we have not had enough responses yet with policies that guarantee human rights and other collective rights, the economic, social, and political rights, and particularly the right of women to live a life free of violence. There have been other pandemics, but things have gotten bad in the last 3 months particularly, and we have to look at state policies as well. The pandemic particularly affects women, workers, and LGBT people, rural workers, and informal workers, domestic workers, peasants, young people, Afro-descendants, and many others that don't have the necessary information for a dignified life with respect to all their rights. Now they live in a very vulnerable situation despite some of the political policies. We have to look after a voice, and women have looked after their work, but they represent more than 80% of the workload. Social and political issues that underscore the gaps and that speak to more political participation. It's clear that this has increased the poverty rate amongst women by 77.9%, and the unemployment rate by 15%. For those who have their own income, there is a gap, a gender gap of 17%, given the inequality of conditions. And in the face of all of this, we ask states to incorporate a gender equality in the face of COVID-19. Those who are responsible for rights for women, we ask them to observe things so that no circumstances will fly in the face of rights, to promote all rights that provide services for women. They will have universal rights established for women that will guarantee socioeconomic situations that are better. We have to guarantee parity of women in all arenas where decisions are taken. This coalition, since 2017, has come to the General Assemblies of the OAS and has asked to look at the situation of women.
That was Ms. Narcissa Ortiz of the Coalition for the Human Rights of Women in the Americas. I had you a little further down on my list, Ms. Ortiz. So now that you have spoken, I want to come back and see whether the Erlendi Zero for Coalition of Persons of African Descent is in the room. Okay, we will move to the next speaker, and if Ms. Ciuro,
No, sorry, Chairman. Excuse me, sir. The spokesperson is there. Erlendi Cuero is there.
She's there.
Yeah, just connect.
Okay.
Erlendi, por favor, active su micrófono.
What I will do, in the interest of time,
Yes, sir.
I will save a spot for her and we'll come back when she gets, it looks like she may have some technical difficulty. In the meantime, we will invite Ms. Lygia Briggs to make a presentation on the Coalition for Life and Family. Ms. Briggs.
Durante la pandemia,
During the pandemic, we've seen the irreplaceable role that the family plays. It is clear that the state plays a subsidiary role, and the family will continue to be the basic unit of society. The state can provide for certain needs of individuals, but it is only the family that can meet the most basic and intrinsic needs of individuals. COVID-19 has caused the death of thousands of people in the region and has affected millions in psychological terms. For all of these reasons, the family has been a refuge where people can find safety and security, especially the most vulnerable, such as older adults, children, pregnant women, and people who are ill, among others. The family has served as a school by providing children with education. Families have acted as hospitals. Families have supported each other economically to help deal with job loss, despite government's efforts to help people, though it is impossible to help everyone. Living in a family with good relationships helps diminish the seriousness of the pandemic. For many people, the family has been more necessary and effective than the state. It is unfortunate, therefore, that the family is not addressed in any of the documents published by the OAS and the Inter-American System and other bodies. None mention the vital role that the family plays for survival of human beings in society. Quite the contrary. Some, such as SIM, present the family as a place that is of most risk for women. We think that it is an exaggeration to generalize a few cases of violence, which should be condemned, and make a negative value judgment about all families. This hides all of the positive aspects of families that we have just seen. Undeniably, there have been unfortunate cases where women or children have experienced violence, but we need to work on that. But in order to address the problem of violence, we must support and provide for families, because children who grow up in stable homes with a mother and a father who are present have shown that they have greater levels of well-being. Therefore, we would like for the OAS and other international bodies to make the family one of its main areas of focus so that it can be valued as a necessary institution. We also urge governments to promote best practices to balance family and work. This is the case for public and private institutions, because if the pandemic has shown us anything, it is that the family is more necessary than ever before. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bridges. We'd now like to ask Maria Victoria Espada, on behalf of the Coalition on Drug Policies, to take the floor.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. Chairman, I believe Erlendi Cuero is ready now.
Oh, okay. So, yes, Ms. Cuero, if you are available, you can take the floor.
Muy buenas tardes. Un saludo.
Good afternoon. I would like to send greetings to all attending this General Assembly. As part of the 50th regular session of the General Assembly, the Coalition of Persons of African Descent and the Americans believe it is important to note that statistics show us that there is a high rate of mortality for people of African descent compared to other groups. This is due to socioeconomic models and political models in the region, and also racial discrimination. We have seen this also in the pandemic, and we are also left out of consultations and programs. We also underscore that young women, LGBTI individuals, and people of African descent suffer in a different and specific way from these inequalities. We have seen a critical rise in violence, especially in Colombia. This coalition, therefore, calls upon states and bodies of the OAS and asks for their cooperation to address our requests and address the causes of COVID-19, and also work to combat racism and racial discrimination. We also urge states to collect data that are disaggregated by ethnic group and race. We also demand a differentiated approach that takes into account ethnicity and gender in various plans. We ask for investment in the health sector and support for and recognition of traditional medicine in order to overcome the pandemic. We also ask for guarantees so that medical staff are able to reach areas where there are large populations of people of African descent. We also know that there are particular challenges being faced by women, youth, and the LGBTI population of African descent. Finally, we will continue to advocate for a fund for the development of people of African descent within the OAS. We also call for the signing and implementation of the Inter-American Convention Against Racism, Racial Discrimination, and Related Forms of Intolerance of the OAS. We also call for the implementation of the guidelines for the International Decade for People of African Descent.
We thank you very much for those remarks. I now ask Ms. Maria Victoria Espada, on behalf of the Coalition on Drug Policies, to take the floor.
Good afternoon, all protocol observed. An important lesson from the pandemic has been the central role that health professionals play to ensure continuity in offering services. But in many countries, workers that deal with substance abuse have not been prioritized. Their working conditions and services have been limited. The pandemic is not an excuse to neglect the needs of people who are dealing with substance abuse. In order to address vulnerabilities and build resilience nationally and throughout the hemisphere to face the crisis, we urge the member states to do the following: address issues associated with drug use and addiction from a public health perspective. We ask that departments dealing with substance abuse problems be considered essential and equipped like other public health departments. Ensure continuity and quality of services and provide sufficient resources. Restrictions on movement, the lack of PPE for certain professionals, among other factors, have meant that thousands of people are not able to address or access services for substance abuse. This is offered by volunteers and civil society, and in many cases, and they have been disproportionately affected during the pandemic. We ask for the continuity of these services to be maintained with quality, professionalism, and financing. We also call for monitoring and evaluation of initiatives addressing the pandemic. It is important to implement new safety treatment protocols. It has been clear that health providers are resilient and creative. We've also seen innovations to help people at risk. We ask for M&E systems to ensure the safety of new measures, evaluate changes and access to medication, and make sure this is based on evidence. Treatment must also be provided in prisons. In order to reduce overcrowding, we ask for alternative measures to imprisonment for drug-related crimes. We ask for more resources to be invested in treatment, education, and rehabilitation with a view to gender and continued care. Ensure respect for human rights in all measures that are taken. We also ask for the international guidelines on human rights and drug policy of the UN to be taken into account, including the instruments of the Inter-American System, as these summarize states' legal obligations in this area. Finally, we know that civil society plays a key role in guaranteeing the right to health, especially during the pandemic, and thus we urge OAS member states to maintain dialogue opportunities in CCAT and also include the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those remarks, Mrs. Spada. Speaking for the Coalition of Youth and Liberties is Marialis Martinoni. Ms. Martinoni, you have the floor. The speaker for the Coalition of Youth and Liberties, is that speaker available? If not, we can move on and come back in the interest of time. So what we'll do is we will return to that at a later time. In the meantime, we'd like to continue with the presentation of the Coalition Human Rights of Teenagers and Youth in Latin America and the Caribbean, represented by Carlos Daniel Ortelado. Mr. Ortelado, you have the floor. We'll go to the next person in the lineup, and if necessary, we will return. So that will conclude the first round of intervention with the input of the Coalition for Inclusive Dialogue as a basis for social innovation, represented by Yimani Calderon. So we will conclude with Yimani Calderon on the input of Coalition for Inclusive Dialogue.
Yimani Calderon, la palabra.
Enviamos un saludo solidario a las ciudadanías latinoamericanas.
We express our solidarity to Latin American citizens suffering from COVID and other measures. We recognize the difficult circumstances that national governments are in, but we believe that efforts have not been sufficient. There has been a lack of strategy and coordination amongst national governments. We have seen issues in Venezuela and a breakdown in public order. This has exacerbated pre-existing conditions. COVID has revealed the historic structural problems that countries have faced. We see the weaknesses in the education and health systems. They're not prepared to address this crisis. We also see the crisis involving healthcare workers, and these crises occur because for years, governments have reduced health and education budgets, also the budgets for science, technology, and innovation. And this makes it difficult to address all of the sectors and key sectors, particularly LGBTQ people, as well as other groups. They are dealing with inequities, which have increased. We have also seen difficulties for certain groups in accessing services. Many of these groups are also experiencing other gaps. We can think of indigenous groups and people of African descent living in remote areas where there may not be medical services. Many exceptional measures have to be taken, and this has increased authoritarianism, checks and balances, and other issues. We have also seen a greater hostility towards CSOs that are speaking out against repression and violence. On the positive side, we can note that civil society has continued to work and mobilize local governments. Other measures have been taken to promote solidarity as well as cooperation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Calderon. And that concludes the first round of interventions by civil society coalitions and group of social actors. I will now open the floor to invite member states who wish to take the floor, the first group of 6 in this round. The chair will recognize the delegation of Paraguay.
Thank you, Chair. I thank all of the organizations who have taken the floor and those who will speak later. This health crisis caused by COVID-19 has changed our way of life in many ways. Last year, at the previous GA, we had never imagined that the next meeting would take place virtually during a pandemic. However, this has not meant that the OAS should not modernize. We have been able to adapt and continue fighting. We cannot allow our GA to leave aside the opinions of civil society. We note the importance of continuing this discussion. Thus, my delegation celebrates the extraordinary participation that we have today. It fills us with optimism. My country will continue to urge for the return to democracy in countries experiencing a lack of liberties, such as the people in Venezuela and Nicaragua. During this GA, moreover, Paraguay maintains a firm position based on its national constitution to defend families and human rights. We will always advocate for constructive dialogue and mutual respect in order to create a consensus that benefits democracy in the hemisphere, international law, and the rule of law. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ambassador. The chair now offers the floor to the United States of America.
Here we are. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to be here today on behalf of the United States to hear the insights and recommendations of our colleagues from civil society as we prepare to engage in the 50th regular session of the OAS General Assembly. The United States strongly supports the participation of civil society, NGOs, the private sector, and other social actors in the work of the OAS. We fully recognize the importance of government, civil society, and the private sector working together to advance our collective goals of democracy, long-term security, and economic prosperity. As host of the 9th Summit of the Americas, the United States is committed to ensuring that civil society has a voice in the summit process and throughout the inter-American system. The challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic are substantial. We must work together to incentivize the private sector to sustain and create jobs as part of the region's recovery. Job creation will be essential in the weeks and months to come, and only the private sector has the resources necessary to meet the challenge. It will be for governments and civil society to create an enabling environment by promoting transparency and the rule of law, which are not only good for human rights, but provide precisely the type of predictability investors seek. Precisely because we recognize the critical role played by diverse social actors, the United States is concerned by the increasing number of restrictions placed on civil society organizations, along with moves to limit religious freedom, as well as the freedoms of expression, peaceful assembly, and association. Such restrictions are especially concerning since successful medical, political, and economic solutions to the COVID pandemic require the contribution, not exclusion, of voices from across the spectrum of government, business, and civil society and religious communities. Nowhere are these concerns more pronounced than in Venezuela, We've all been alarmed by the dramatic political and humanitarian crisis fueled by the Maduro regime's deliberate destruction of democratic institutions and its violations and abuses of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Building on the groundbreaking work of the OAS panel of independent international experts designated by Secretary General Almagro, the United Nations Independent International Fact-Finding Mission in Venezuela just last month released its report. It concluded there are reasonable grounds to believe crimes against humanity were committed in Venezuela, likely with the support of Maduro and some of his top ministers. Of special relevance to civil society, the report covered human rights abuses in the context of protests. It stated that there were reasonable grounds to believe that recurring arbitrary detentions of demonstrators occurred in violation of their rights to liberty and security, and many were killed by the regime. The regime commonly charged peaceful protesters under civilian jurisdiction with politically motivated offenses, including public incitement, instigation to commit a crime, criminal association, and obstruction of a public thoroughfare. State security forces reportedly subjected demonstrators to torture and cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment. This newest report represents an urgent call to action for our entire hemisphere. We must continue to engage here through the OAS and at other appropriate fora to support justice for victims. The international community must act in support of those Venezuelans fighting for needed change, most notably the legitimate government of interim President Juan Guaido. The United States believes strongly that this OAS General Assembly must take action in a way that is consistent with our shared values. The illegitimate Maduro regime's unconstitutional governments and its human rights violations and abuses cannot continue. In Nicaragua and Cuba, we have called on those governments to respond to people's demands for democratic reform and cease ongoing repression and violence. We seek what any democratic nation should want: the release of all individuals who've been arbitrarily or unlawfully detained, a return to democratic order, and free and fair elections. In Cuba, the Castro dictatorship continues to harass, arrest, and imprison human rights defenders who speak out against censorship and repression, or who voice opinions that differ from those of the regime. Cuba's vibrant civil society is leading an inspiring fight against the tyranny of their government, but they require the support of international bodies like the OAS to hold the regime accountable for their actions. In Nicaragua, the Ortega government's refusal to take meaningful action on these issues has demonstrated unmistakable bad faith. It is now incumbent on us as the OAS to respond with concrete actions in support of free and fair elections before they are held in November of 2021. One key element, need for credible election observation, which remains a core OAS strength. That's why the United States continues to support the work of the OAS Elections Department and the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. We again call on the Nicaraguan government to implement fully the recommendations previously issued by OAS electoral observation missions and by the Human Rights Commission, and permit these monitoring mechanisms to return to the country. In light of the new and various pressures on many civil society organizations and social actors are facing in the Americas, the United States believes it's imperative that our government more effectively collaborate to engage public and private actors in pragmatic responses. This includes joint efforts to promote and defend religious freedom, which includes the freedom of conscience, religion, of belief, and non-belief. OAS engagement could not be more timely. Pew studies have indicated that more than 80% of the world's population live in countries with severe restrictions on religious freedom. Therefore, we must increase our efforts to protect religious freedom, and our region can serve as a model and a champion globally. The United States is partnering again this year with the OAS and member states committed to advancing freedom of conscience, religion, or belief to confront persecution throughout the region. Immediately after the OAS General Assembly, Colombia will host the first hemispheric forum on freedom of religion or belief on October 22 through 23. The forum will promote cooperation in the hemisphere, provide information on promoting religious freedom, and create space to recognize and promote interfaith dialogue. This builds on concerns noted in the OAS over the past year regarding attacks and restrictions on religious actors in Nicaragua and Cuba. Both countries were designated by Secretary Pompeo as special watch list countries. It also builds on the International Religious Freedom or Belief Alliance launched by the United States this year as a promotion and advocacy partnership with 31 member countries, including Brazil and Colombia. So in closing, I would note that by working together, we can create more opportunities for people in the Americas and in the months ahead to contribute to more prosperous economies and communities based on good governance and transparent practices. As the OAS looks to the 9th Summit of the Americas in the United States, we welcome the chance to hear from all of you on ways we can better engage on the most pressing issues facing our hemisphere, both here at the OAS and the summit process. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the entire membership.
We thank the United States for those remarks and now call on Ambassador Yahiva from Ecuador to take the floor.
Given that what we did from last year, we have to realize the current situation that we have throughout the region. The commitment of our president for human rights and fundamental freedoms for all people also promote a dialogue on systems that will help our society precisely given the current situation. We have to be attentive to all the demands that society puts before us. And this will is applied to those groups that are formally considered minorities and in reality are majorities. That is the basis of all government action, such as indigenous peoples, Afro-descendants, disabled people, immigrants, refugees, and LGBTI people. The corona pandemic is unprecedented and has caused a severe, hard-hit impact on all the peoples in our world. It has had a hard-hitting effect on health, human rights, and other areas. We have to systematically look at all of these rights, and we have to work towards a consensus as we come up with actions for civil society to move ahead with total freedom of expression. And that is why we have to follow the mandates and look at people with disabilities and LGBTI community to have the rights for all women and equity amongst all genders, and a follow-up of the Inter-American Democratic Charter and its pillars. This is anniversary of which we will commemorate this year. There are other activities as well that will be celebrated in Ecuador, celebrating Inter-American Charter of Human Rights, the Inter-American System of Human Rights, and we will also look at other interests too that have been ratified in the American system, including human rights for all people, as well as the Inter-American Convention Against Racism, Discrimination, and other forms of discrimination. This will be done with the help of all people, and as such, we have made available all the wherewithal and looked at the possibility of having inter-American instruments in these issues. In other areas, with the Inter-American Commission of Women, the National Council for People, we will have a competition for all candidates so that we can see an exercise of human rights for women whilst we strengthen democracy for all elections that we have in the region. I'd like to reiterate our commitment and all of the authorities that have breached human rights. And let me just say once again that we are committed to work for those people who have had to leave their country because of a political crisis. More than untold numbers of brothers and sisters have had to leave their countries in our neighboring country. There have to be mechanisms that can deal with these situations, and they are crucial so that actions can be taken to deal with these situations in the face of a crisis that have undermined all of the wherewithal that states have. And to conclude then, I would like to point out that in the fight against COVID-19, we will have to strengthen multinationalism in the world based on cooperation and solidarity throughout the hemisphere with the help of the agencies and organizations that we have in the Americas and the coordination and cooperation of all governments and social actors, and with you from civil society as we join hands together to move ahead, strengthen democracy, and avoid inadmissible breaches of human rights.
I thank the delegation of Ecuador for those remarks and call on the delegation of Peru to take the floor.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon and special greetings to all the members of civil society who are with us this afternoon. And obviously, they have given us a deep-seated look at everything that is going on right now in our communities. In Peru, we feel that it's crucial to have these dialogues with states and civil society and look at the assembly as a place that strengthens this possibility. We have had a lot of harmony as the years have passed with the OAS and civil society, given its presence. The presence of citizenship with their own development and with their own cooperation and the exercise toward democracy is what we have to look at. And this is very valid to have this arena for a dialogue in a very direct way, looking at all of the points of civil society and the social actors on topics that are of crucial and utmost importance: strengthening of democracy and the full-fledged respect of fundamental freedoms and human rights, and particularly for vulnerable populations that have been historically discriminated against, particularly as we grapple with the pandemic. Now, in this regard, we share the pillars of the Inter-American Democratic Charter and seek to eliminate all forms of discrimination, particularly ethnic, racial, and gender, and the various forms of intolerance, as well as to promote and protect human rights for indigenous peoples, Afro-descendants, with full-fledged respect for ethnicities, which will contribute to strengthening our democracy. The pandemic, COVID-19, throughout the entire region, presents a lot of different challenges. Now, as a response to the pandemic, we have to have and open up an arena for dialogue with civil society in the design, monitoring, and evaluation, and in implementation. We have to continue promoting participation with transparency, accountability, so that we can have effective participation. In Peru, in the last 4 years, with the participation of civil society here in the OAS, the chair has promoted actions to guarantee and strengthen this arena for participation. As such, my country, Peru, looked toward inclusive dialogue and participation, looking at the differences of all people, Afro-descendants, young people, workers, and everyone, understanding the undeniable contributions in the fight that they have. We continue to strengthen all of the arenas for dialogue with civil society and social actors in the OAS and in the summits process of the Americas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. We now turn to the delegation of Brazil.
I'm very happy as a Brazilian delegation to participate in this dialogue with representatives from civil society organizations, the private sector, and other social actors during the 50th General Assembly session of the OAS. We feel that this is of utmost relevance to hear the different opinions as they are shared with regards to the dialogue that we have in the organization. We would like to avail ourselves of this opportunity to have this dialogue and to look at some of the priorities of the Brazilian government with regards to the topics that have been broached. We would underscore initially in the organization that Brazil coordinated the process to craft an International Day of the Family, which is of crucial importance in terms of public policy with a focus on the family, particularly within the context of COVID-19. This is an initiative which underscored the relevance of safety nets for families, as well as family members. We supported initiatives adopted in the Pan American Health Organization in grappling with the COVID-19 pandemic. We have, as such, respected human rights, fundamental freedoms, as well, and health measures that have been clear and well balanced. We have tried to save lives and protect everyone. We are particularly observant of vulnerable groups, particularly those that have been heavily impacted with the pandemic. The protection of life and looking askance at violence against women is what we have looked at. We are committed to promote equality between men and women as we have it stipulated in the Brazilian Constitution. All religious expressions have to be protected, as well as those who have no religion. We have to move against intolerance based on beliefs or religions. This is a growing concern of the Brazilian government, and we underscore in this regard participation of the State and Ambassador Araújo in the Hemispheric Forum for Religious and Belief Freedom organized for October in Colombia. One of the most important priorities is for children. We have to promote and protect the rights of children and their families to guarantee their well-being. We share the conviction to work against violence and discrimination promoted against people because of race, sex, color, or ethnicity, or any other feature. It goes against the regional system to protect human rights, which have to be the core of our societies. Since December last year, we put together a group of countries, friends of those who are disabled, so that they have more visibility to protect their human rights in the region. As a multi-ethnic society, we continue to work to implement measures to prevent and fight against racism, and we affirm our commitments for equality, opportunity, and to guarantee full-fledged rights of Afro-descendant and indigenous peoples in our country. Since this year, Brazil is coordinator of the LGBT group in the OAS. We have presented paragraphs to prevent violence and discrimination against LGBT people in draft resolution on human rights to be considered by the General Assembly of the organization. We have coordinated and looked at regimes that oppress their own people. We're not indifferent. We work alongside those who want to come up with solutions for the most grave situations in human rights. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for this opportunity.
We thank the distinguished ambassador of Brazil And the chair will note that we will take the first three delegations, that'll be Venezuela, Mexico, and Guatemala in this round, and we will give Argentina first shot in the next round. The chair now recognizes the ambassador of Venezuela.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And ambassadors, warm greetings to Secretary General Almagro and Assistant Secretary General, as well as all the permanent representatives of the organization. I'd like to warmly greet all members of civil society. Given that this is the General Assembly of the OAS, the representatives of all coalitions and civil society and social actors have underscored the challenges in our society and have had an opportunity to let us hear their concerns from across the continent so that governments can take due measures. Once again, we're looking at these things as possible instruments. States in their interventions have supported establishing the rule of law and strengthening the public sector in Venezuela. The representatives of young people and all other sectors of society, as well as the coalitions, have underscored very important topics: health, rights for women, and other situations that are affiliated to COVID and the pandemic, and rights for women, indigenous peoples, and women. And our delegation has taken due note of the concerns and comments that have been made. I would like to very especially speak to the situation and the pandemic. And this has been a humanitarian catastrophe in my country, given the omissions of the usurpist government of Nicolas Maduro. And this has been in the advent of COVID-19. This is a pretext for greater repression. And possibly it's more grave now. The government has had no policy whatsoever to fight against the pandemic in any systematic way. The figures are alarming, as well as is the dearth of information. There's been no sharing of information or apprising, but this is crucial for debate. There has been a lot of censure in Venezuela on issues that have to do with health and things that we would have to grapple with this scourge. The numbers in the hospitals are very high because the necessary protective materials are simply not there as they deal with this pandemic. This is what we're seeing. This is one more fact of this dictatorship, and it makes clear not only their full-fledged authoritarian nature, but their total incompetence in terms of dealing with the situation. I'd like to conclude so that I don't have too much more ado and just congratulate the Secretary General Almagro for the way that he has run our organization and brought together civil society. Thank you very much.
Ambassador Tyrez. And now I offer the floor to Ambassador Eliana Baños of Mexico.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Warm greetings to all participants here from Mexico. It's very important to have this dialogue, looking at the principles of transparency, democracy within the framework of an open dialogue and our commitment to multilateralism, and the importance of the participation in all fora in organizations that represent Afro-descendant communities, indigenous peoples, and others. We have to involve governments and participation of other actors, which is crucial. And this means we have to guarantee not only access to debates and relevant information in the organization, but also we have to also allow for comments. Mexico has undertaken activities to strengthen its participation in dialogues like this one. Mexico participates with firm commitment in all bodies in this organization to promote the highest standards and respect for human rights. And we continue to support the IACHR, given the importance of people, given that we would like to underscore that last January, Mexico ratified the Inter-American Convention against racial discrimination and all other forms of intolerance, and the Inter-American Convention against all forms of discrimination and intolerance, and instruments which is very relevant to combat the scourges that affect our societies. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, all rights are for everyone, and that is why Mexico surely believes in the importance of recognizing diversity and all of the special features of diversity. This leads us to underscore the different features that we have. Along this line, Mexico ratifies its commitment to promote an authentic, intercultural, and respectful dialogue, and its participation in the OAS will continue. Thank you very much.
We thank the delegation of Mexico for those remarks, and we will conclude this round with the delegation of Guatemala. Ambassador Rita, you will take the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I would like to underscore the important contribution of civil society in this forum, particularly in response to the challenges that we are grappling with given COVID-19. My congratulations to all. The pandemic presents an unprecedented crisis and has put an increase on poverty and has increased poverty, hunger, and inequality. The government of Guatemala has arduously worked to promote development and well-being of Guatemalan families in all corners of the country, particularly with an emphasis on the most vulnerable groups. And as such, our policy approach in Guatemala recognizes the family as the fundamental nucleus of spiritual and moral values of society that guarantees and protects human life from conception onwards. For my country, it's imperative to continue to strengthen participation of civil society in all arenas, effectively and across the board. And we also feel that participation plays a very important role in the Guatemalan Development Plan, both as we look at political and other rights and an evaluation thereof. This constitutes the main tool and the wherewithal that civil society and private sector and international cooperation can have as they establish the objective to continue development. As such, opening up opportunities for participation in the framework of the rule of law through laws for development and councils for development are part and parcel of the Americas. This organization opens up an opportunity to have positive participation for civil society and decision-making spheres within the organization, underscoring coordination and working hand in hand. And this speaks to the needs and responses from the citizenship as well as public institutions. Mr. Chairman, in the OAS, or Guatemala would like to commend our work for strengthening participation of civil society and all social actors in the Organization of the American States and in the Summits process of the Americas, which speaks to meeting the needs and underscores that the OAS will continue to support member states to make the capacity of all institutions of governments and all persons more robust as we incorporate the suggestions from civil society and social sectors. We truly appreciate the participation of civil society organizations and other social actors, as well as all of their contributions to strengthen democracy, integral development, and the promotion and protection of human rights, as well as multidimensional approaches in the Americas. Mr. Chairman, within the framework of COVID-19 and with attention to vulnerable groups, we have to pay more attention. These include indigenous peoples, but we cannot look askance at anyone. In Guatemala, as in the rest of the Americas, indigenous peoples have dealt with this using their ancestral knowledge for development. Indigenous peoples in the Americas and in the Caribbean, of which Guatemala is a firm member, underscores this arena for dialogue, and it's interested to support this organization as we make the working group more robust, with a view to helping and assisting others so that they have opportunities. We want to help highly vulnerable populations, as well as underscore cooperation for indigenous peoples. And as such, we will be making strides given the Inter-American Declaration for Indigenous Peoples. To conclude, Mr. Chairman, then, I would like to underscore the articles in the political constitution of Guatemala that recognize that all human beings are free and should enjoy rights. And that is why we, as the government of Guatemala, would like to express our interest to work with civil society and other social actors so that we can achieve full-fledged human rights for all and everyone. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the distinguished ambassador of Guatemala for those remarks. We take note of the feedback from the representatives of OAS member states present here, and we will now proceed with the second block of interventions by the spokespersons of the coalitions and groups of social actors. We will start the second round with representatives of the private sector and workers, and then give the floor again to the civil society coalitions. Speaking on behalf of CITAL for the private sector of the Americas, we welcome Ms. Maria Isabel Leon Klimke. Ms. Klimke, you have the floor.
Civil en el marco de la 50ª sesión ordinaria de la Asamblea General de la Organización.
I am the chair of CONFIP, a group in Peru that promotes employers' organizations for the benefit of citizens. We also work with the International Organization for Employers. We are focused on the 4 pillars of the OAS. According to ECLAC, Peru is being greatly affected by the pandemic. We have seen a rise in informal employment and unemployment. Both of these have increased, along with increased violations of human rights. There are also projections regarding poverty that are similar. According to ECLAC, about 25% of the Peruvian population will be considered poor. And neighboring countries will suffer from this as well. The private, public sector, academia, and civil society must work together to provide a response to COVID. That is why we are working with the ILO and focusing on the OAS and its 4 pillars. We're working to protect workers at the workplace, among other solutions. This is a position that has enjoyed consensus amongst various social actors, but we cannot do this without the private sector. We generate 80% of investment for business in Peru. We need to sustain this so that the private sector can play its role and grow and increase well-being for the population. Private companies can make contributions, but this requires trust. The private sector is key for investment and innovation. To that end, we need the government's support so that we can create an environment that is resilient and allows the private sector to grow, to create decent jobs. Companies need to be able to resume their activity and continue to create jobs. A lesson learned from this pandemic is that we must have more dialogue in order to reach consensus. This crisis could be an opportunity to promote commitments and allow for human rights to be the center of our work. Let us face the crisis with hope and work to build a better world for our children and grandchildren. To that end, we also need individual liberties and the defense of democracy, which must continue to function. We also need partnerships between the public and private sectors. Democracy is a fundamental pillar of the OAS and is also key for creating jobs. We must also use this crisis to build a more resilient economy and society, ones that are more just and fair. The wealth obtained must be used to promote the development of basic quality services for all citizens without distinction. Thank you.
We thank Ms. Trente for the video presentation. I would now like to call on Mr. Jose Oliveira Cosete to speak on behalf of workers of the hemisphere. Mr. Oliveira, you have the floor.
Millones de trabajadores exponemos ante esta 50ª.
Speaking here before the 50th GA, the international economic situation is extremely complicated. There are tensions, risks, and uncertainties. We are concerned that the OAS is no longer a reference and a place for the region to face global matters. States must commit to addressing these issues. We express our solidarity with Ecuador, Bolivia, Cuba, and Venezuela, and we urge the lifting of the economic blockade and sanctions and restrictions on electoral processes. COSATE commends the Bolivian people on their return to democracy, thanks to recent elections that were held. We are concerned about the many deaths caused by the pandemic. We also see that the government has not played its role and upheld its responsibilities. Policies are threatening more lives. There's a platform for development in the Americas, and we call for a new relationship between the environment, the state, the economy, and citizens, one where labor is a central element on the economic and social agenda worldwide. Ladies and gentlemen, in light of the current situation, we need to have foreign policy that encourages respect for sovereignty and self-determination of peoples, as well as the rights of other countries and respect for their matters. We also advocate for rights and ways to address this economic crisis. This is the worst crisis in the century, and therefore we need cooperation, solidarity, and regional integration in order to resume sustainable development and focus on social transformation that ensures human security, democracy, and the sovereignty of countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Olvera. I'm now pleased to give the floor to the Coalition for Human Development and Human Life International, represented by Felipe Vizcarrondo. Mr. Vizcarrondo, please, you have the floor. Okay.
Hello.
Yes, please.
Thank you, sir. I apologize for that minor glitch there. Good afternoon. My name is Felipe Vizcarrondo. I am a medical doctor, pediatrician, also have a degree in bioethics. I was born in Puerto Rico, but have lived in the United States for most of my life. I serve as a volunteer in the education section of Human Life International. We will address the theme of this General Assembly within the context of the most fundamental human right, the right to life from conception to natural death. A study published in the Journal of Perinatal Medicine recommends that the treatment of pregnant women with COVID-19, in order to avoid adverse outcome of the pregnancy, that the treatment be tailor-guided, identifying the risk factors for the child. High risks for the child are infection in the first trimester and prematurity. The recommendation is to consider the well-being of both the mother and the child. In contrast, the OAS Commission of Human Rights stated that minor pregnant girls must be guaranteed the exercise of their sexual and reproductive rights during the pandemic. Making abortion more accessible. Abortion does not cure the patient. Abortion results in a dead child and a still very sick mother. Hospitals in several countries are considering the denial of medical care to elderly and disabled persons with COVID-19. The concern is insufficient medical resources. ARD resources should be saved for younger patients with a better prognosis. This approach of medical rationing is not good medical care, and it may lead to the practice of euthanasia. Abortion and euthanasia are not the answer to the COVID-19 pandemic. We exhort officials and ambassadors to refuse these dreadful solutions. We encourage everyone to reject the culture of death and embrace the culture of life. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Vizcarrondo. I'd now like to give the floor to Mauricius Valencia Matignongi from the Coalition Youth and Freedom. If you can take the floor, please. While we wait for that presenter, let me call on Daniel Ortolando from the Coalition Human Rights of Teenagers and Youth to take the floor.
Muy buenas tardes a todas, a todos, a todos.
Good afternoon from Paraguay. We make up the Coalition of Rights of Adolescents and Teenagers in the Americas. Looking at the health context caused by COVID-19, we need to look at the various vulnerable populations. There is quarantine, and many other measures have disproportionately affected teenagers and adolescents. We ask for this to be a major point on the agenda. Many teenagers and adolescents report an increase in unremunerated work, and others believe that gender-based violence and violence against other groups has increased. Women and LGBTI groups also have indicated that they do not have protection from this violence. There are other pandemics other than the COVID-19 pandemic. We see gender-based violence, machismo, the lack of access to health services, criminalization of abortion, among others. We also see an increase in maternal mortality, and many young girls become pregnant. States must guarantee education and comprehensive sex education, as well as other types of education. Work must also be done to address HIV. Young people living with HIV have not been able to obtain treatment during the pandemic. We also know that there are obstacles to contraception. This will increase the number of undesired pregnancies and increase risks. Heteronormativity, cisnormativity, and binarism predominate and feed into discrimination against various groups. We must make sure that all rights are protected, and this will save the lives of many. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ortolando, for those remarks on behalf of the youth. And I'm checking to see whether Ms. Martinovny is on standby and available.
She is, Chairman. She's ready.
Okay, she can take the floor.
Good afternoon, everybody. I wonder if you can hear me well. The peoples of Latin America and the entire world are going through a period that is causing deep-seated political and health problems. This crisis has underscored and brought this to the attention of the Organization of American States, emphasizing the situation that we're living in the region. On the other hand, I would like to emphasize that COVID-19 has brought together a solidarity of peoples, given some of the consequences of this disease. The young people of the Americas, we are crucial actors in work against COVID. Our generation has a true vocation, and we're well aware that we are spearheading a lot of the changes that we need to see in the world. And for that, young people have to work towards this. Poverty has deepened, as well as inequality. Undernutrition has deepened. There are secondary effects. The International Labor Organization ensures that young people have been affected given socioeconomic impacts. In the face of this dire picture, I think that we truly have to value that family is at the core of society and plays an undeniable role in society, and that is why it's crucial that we respect the rights of parents to educate their children, as recognized in Article 12 and 17 of the Inter-American Convention of Human Rights. The pandemic will lead us to going back to valuing life and human rights, which is to protect life from conception. And that's why we feel that it's horrific that there are activities that fly against this fundamental right. We demand states and the Organization of American States to get back on the track to orchestrate coordinated work to deal with these issues so that the inter-American system can go back and represent all states and not allow that the Inter-American Court and the ICHR carry out activities that fly in the face of basic rights of citizens. How much time are we going to let go looking at these activities, which will be the loss of opportunities? Thank you.
We thank you for those remarks. At this juncture, we will watch a video presentation submitted by the Coalition for the Dignity of Persons with Disabilities in the Americas. Speaking on this video is Mr. Dane Lerman. Can we have the video, please?
Since the pandemic, people have lived in isolation. Some are in rehabilitation centers. Others are isolated and not participating. For disabilities, we seek participation and inclusion. Going back to the past life, sheltering in place and the right to fundamental rights has been something that has affected everybody. We have had to have responses for disabilities. For most of them, this has not been the case because we have barriers. We do not have the resources to finance what we need. People with disabilities in the Americas have their rights restricted, and as well as their opportunities to participate. Thus, we would like to ask to take into consideration specialize and all specialized the following recommendations: that people with disabilities can get together with other groups and that their needs be respected and given, and that their physical environment also be respected. We have to promote a campaign from the OAS so that we can have expeditious recommendations from UNESCO, United Nations, to work in favor of people with disabilities, and that the budgets be provided so that we can fully participate. We have to spearhead campaigns so that people with disabilities can participate across the board. We have to guarantee that people with disabilities have economic and technical support. We recommend that the OAS adopt a cross-cutting policy so that this will include a system of justice that adopts decisions to favor people with disabilities. We do this and say that a strong democracy will guarantee human rights as fundamental rights for people with disabilities.
We thank the coalition for that video presentation. Continue with the speaking order. We are now going to listen to Mr. Hernando Viveros on behalf of the Coalition of Communities of African Descent. Mr. Viveros, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Your Excellency Almagro, ambassadors, and all delegations as well as civil society. We're very happy to be here at the OAS as we face the pandemic. Given all the societies of the Americas, we're looking at the impact of the pandemic on all people. These things, the pandemic has had an impact on the environment, on health, on our environment, on social arenas, as well as on civil rights. This has generated an unprecedented situation since the crossing of the Atlantic. All of this is within the framework of a situation in which populations are affected. And this has also affected democracy, which has to be looked at as a reality. This situation is within the framework of a new reality, given the pandemic. COVID-19 is under this situation that I'm describing. The situation has led to some inequality, and for us, we cannot look askance at this structural issues. Today, we would like to ask the Organization of American States to look at certain recommendations and situations that we have in Colombia and other areas. Our brother country of Brazil, where young people are dealt with violence. The World Health Organization considers that the OAS has an important role to play as we move ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Riveros. I'd now like to give the floor to Ms. Yvette Laviada in her capacity as spokesperson for the Coalition for the Self-Determination of Peoples versus Institutional Corruption. Ms. Laviada, you have the floor.
Your Excellencies, ambassadors, before beginning, I'd like to thank you for your presence. And I would like to emphasize that in Latin America, this is one of the most unequal regions that exist on the face of the world, including sub-Saharan Africa. And according to UN United Nations Population Fund, we're so unequal that a woman in a poor neighborhood has a life expectancy of 18, as opposed to a rich woman in the same neighborhood. We hope that the achievements of international organizations can be had and enjoyed for all. Unfortunately, we see with deep concern that some of the OAS institutions have emphasized groups and topics that do not represent the needs throughout the region. Let me just give you an example. The Inter-American Commission of Women, in its report on life of women, emphasizes 7 times the topic of health and reproductive health. This is a topic that is used to advance forward. It only refers to education of boys and girls only twice, but it does so negatively to underscore that this represents a greater burden for women. It mentions poverty only twice. There is no mention of adult women and women of age. The same thing could have been said of the ICHR, which on the 14th of September 2020 published a press communique calling states to guarantee personal and reproductive health, as well as sexual and reproductive rights. Also moving towards mentioning abortion, but this is not contemplated in the Inter-American Convention on Human Rights, nor any other international treaty. It's very worrisome that institutions of the OAS, in keeping with this mandate, promote agendas with pressures put by pressure groups, as opposed to looking at the true problems of the region. It's really worrisome that these institutions overlook us. They exclude thousands of abused, raped women who walk hand in hand with them, pregnant women and their rights, live in poverty. Thousands of sick children are abandoned. Children are taken in by our organizations, young people with drug problems, old people who live on the streets, marginalized young people that don't even have a bowl of food. They're sick, they're needy, and we have to continue the work that our organization does for the most needy, and that is why
Riada. And I'd now like to give the floor to Mr. Gustavo Gallon, speaking for the Coalition of Organizations of Human Rights of the Americas. Mr. Gallon, you have the floor.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. My name is Gustavo Gallon. I am the Director of the Colombian Commission of Lawyers, and I am part of the Coalition of Organizations of Human Rights of the Americas. We would respectfully like to share 3 concerns. First, the lack of a human rights approach and responses provided by states to address the COVID-19 pandemic. In various countries of the Americas, repressive measures have been used, including the unnecessary use of force. Other measures, such as imposing mandatory quarantines, have been imposed without time limits, minimum measures for prevention, or guarantees for independent review processes. These measures, in addition to major social and economic gaps that preceded the pandemic, perpetuate inequality and discrimination, particularly for vulnerable groups. Measures carried out by states should work to combat discrimination, guarantee access to water, food, and appropriate medical care, including reproductive and sexual health services. They should prevent, address, and sanction gender-based violence, particularly in mandatory quarantine centers. Otherwise, we will see cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, as well as a violation of the right to health. Second, year after year, the General Assembly issues resolutions seeking to ensure effective protection of those who defend human rights. Yet, our region continues to be the most dangerous for human rights defenders in the world. Human rights defenders continue to be victims of threats, aggression, harassment, stigmatization, criminalization, assassinations, and even arbitrary cancellation of the legal status of their organization. We are particularly concerned by the serious situation in Nicaragua, Colombia, Venezuela, Mexico, Guatemala, and Honduras. That is why we demand that the importance of our work be recognized. Participatory public policies must be adopted, ones that are transparent and comprehensive, and that have an intersectional approach that identify the differentiated risks that female human rights defenders face. These must include investigation and sanctioning of crimes against us. Third, we urge states to reaffirm their commitment to the effective operation of the Inter-American human rights system. Next year, there will be many elections of members of the Court and Inter-American Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Gayon, for your presentation. And now we'll go to Ms. Kayantana Saloa from the LGBTTI Coalition. Ms. Saloa, you have the floor.
Ministros, representantes estatales y colegas de la sociedad civil. Queremos destacar la entrada en vigencia de la Convención Interamericana.
Many countries in the Caribbean still have laws that criminalize consensual sexual relations between people of the same gender. LGBTI individuals have disproportionately suffered from the COVID-19 pandemic. In Peru, Panama, and some cities in Colombia, there have been different forms of violence against trans individuals as well. The economic effects have been devastating for LGBT populations. Many are sex workers, and the lack of recognition of this work means that they cannot receive government assistance. There are also issues regarding access to health services, as well as access to hormonal treatments, medication for HIV, among others. Migrants and refugees have also been excluded from government assistance during the pandemic. We are concerned by the conservative movement that we have seen in many states in the region in response to the pandemic. For many people, the home is not a safe place at this time. LGBT individuals have a great deal to contribute, but we are still criminalized. We know that the COVID-19 pandemic has created a great deal of difficulty for people in their life plans. We ask states to ratify the Inter-American Convention against all forms of discrimination and intolerance. Measures must be adopted to allow for access to health services and HIV treatment. The right to abortion must also be guaranteed, and measures must be taken in order to assist these populations. Rights of sex workers must also be guaranteed. Migrants and refugees must also enjoy access to their rights. Thank you.
We thank Mr. Leo for her intervention. Now adds Ms. Martha Judith Cisnero from the Coalition Education and Culture for Democracy to take the floor.
De nuestra vocera, Elsa Méndez, a quien se le este evento por la oficina encargada de las relaciones con la sociedad civil. En nombre de mi coalición,
On behalf of my coalition, I wish to share that the pandemic has had terrible consequences on various areas of human activity, particularly education, the loss of schooling, and the uncertain beginning of the new school year will bring catastrophic consequences for developing countries that don't have robust online systems to facilitate educators. Our coalition underscores the human right established in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in Article 26.3. Parents will have the right to choose the education that they wish to give to their children. And also the American Convention on Human Rights, Article 12.4. Parents have the right for their children to receive religious and moral education that is in line with their own beliefs. In several member states, there has been controversy over the fact that parents are involved in children's schooling. This lockdown has shown that families are resilient. when it comes to caring for sick members of the family, addressing job loss, and maintaining education for children. It is appropriate for parents to be involved in their children's education, and we cannot allow their participation to go away.